Okay. And so with this in mind, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through each of our panelists. They'll introduce each other. They'll introduce themselves, not each other. And they'll tell us about their educational journey, what they do in the helping fields, wherever they work. And if I can ask the panelists, because, you know, a lot of our students here are in the social work program. And as we know, social work is all about integration of services, using that system of services and really doing that. So what I would like Professor Amparo and Dr. Medrano, when you talk about your areas, tell us how you work with other communities in the area for the benefit of the social work class here. But what we're really interested in is your educational journey. Why did you guys decide to do what you're doing? And then tell us a bit about your education. Where did it lead you, and what path did it end up taking you? So let's see. Let's begin. I'd like to start with Dr. Valadez. As everyone knows, she is our up and coming. She actually developed the AA in social work here at TOCC. Before that, we had an AA in social services, which was more of a paraprofessional type of degree. And then we have Professor Amparo and Dr. Medrano here, who have different areas that we'd like to also focus on here at TOCC in different areas of the helping field. But Dr. Valdez, I'd like to give you the floor to talk about your journey in social work and where that has led you. And so I'm going to give you the floor.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Some of you I have had in classes before. Some of you I've never met. Maybe you're going to be in one of my courses next semester, so I look forward to you. And it's nice to meet Jose and Michael. See your name in print all the time, but yeah, so way back when I was young, social work was not probably the most popular up and coming profession. When people thought about social work, they just thought about that typical, stereotypical person that came and knocked on the door and looked in people's cupboards and told parents that they weren't taking care of their children and taking them away and things like that. And of course, with an Indian country, with the clashes with church and politics and boarding schools, I think historically social work did not have a very good rap. Nowadays, I think you hear the word social work in a lot of different settings, and it really has come up as the true profession that it really is. So when I was younger, I wanted to be a nurse, a healing profession. And I would imagine everyone in this room today, including our faculty here, they're healers. They want to be involved in a compassionate, healing, giving type of job. And so I thought, you know, nurses, that's what nurses do. They nurture, and it's exciting, and you work with different people. Well, I'm not really good at math. And then science did not really excite me either. So it's kind of like, now what do I do? I just, nursing is not going to be it for me. And usually students that get into social work, it's not uncommon for them to first think about nursing or to think about teaching or even to think about the field of psychology. And then realize that as a social worker, you get to do so many different things in so many different settings that it's just an extremely flexible profession. So I was interested in working with children and families, and I did some work during my college years, and my bachelor's level degree is in social work. with a concentration in child welfare and also American Indian Studies. I worked for a couple years, and then I decided to continue on and get my master's degree in social work. And later on, at the ripe old age of 59, almost 60, I got my doctorate degree. So for those of you that are a little bit older and think I'm too old to go to school, I'll never finish, this isn't going to work, you just keep on looking ahead. And you really, kind of set your goals and just go for them, even if it takes a long time. And so I was interested in working with children and families. And so I have really had lots of opportunities to work in many different settings, working with children and families, but also with adults with a lot of different systems. In social work, you are required to do a number of internships, formal internships, and I was able to do some really cool ones. I did school social work, worked in an after school kind of inner city program, worked in adolescent halfway house because I was also interested in drug and alcohol studies. And of course, in social work, drug and alcohol use, mental health issues, trauma, social justice issues. Those are the kind of things that pop up all the time. My last internship in my graduate program was actually in a rural child protection worker type position where I had really difficult clients. And I think the difficulty was the rural setting, often like tribal settings where you just don't have the kinds of resources that you really need to have. My education took me to a lot of different jobs, including also being a foster parent. I worked as a school social worker. I worked in drug and alcohol programs with adolescents, residential, after school kind of day treatment type programs. I was a child mental health case manager at one time where I actually developed a model for a large rural county where children were in residential treatment or they were in group homes. And my focus was to really work on the child and the family and try to get them reintegrated back into the community and back at home as soon as possible. Or kind of the flip side, to do family preservation and hook the child up and also the families with all kinds of services from all directions that could really support the success of that family and the healing and wellness of the child or the children in the family. I've also done a lot of work in different settings in regards to outpatient mental health therapy. I've worked with adults, I've worked with adolescents, I've worked with children, families. So it's the career has been really flexible for me. One of the last kind of direct practice job I had before getting into teaching is I was an outpatient pediatric medical social worker. So I got to work in an outpatient clinical setting with children that had special needs all the way from birth to about 17 or 18 years old. And also did some work with adults that had experienced traumatic brain injuries and also strokes. So I got to work with a real multidisciplinary team, PT, OT, speech, worked with school systems, worked with families, worked with the county system, financial supports, all kinds of things like that. So in '94, I actually started my full-time career in teaching. And so I taught with the College of St. Scholastica, which is a private Catholic college in northern Minnesota, kind of surrounded by 7 different tribes, and was able to teach students in multiple settings, including a tribal community college setting. And I retired from there after 27 years of teaching full-time and moved to Arizona, and was able in 2019 to become part of the TOCC family. And as Dr. Peterson said at that time, looking at how can we develop a degree program that really prepares students to start getting into the workforce and also to kind of seamlessly, without having to take any extra credits, be able to go into a bachelor's of social work program and complete in 2 years if they choose to do that full time. So that is the program that we developed, and that's been going strong since fall 2019. Let's see what else. I'd like to open it up for questions.
Dr. Valdez, I'd like to start with a question, and then we can open up to students. I'm curious, what gives you the passion to do what you do, both not only as a professor of students to teach that next generation that's coming up, but entering social work? What was the passion that gave you that drive?
I think the beginning times were even in my childhood growing up. And like I share with my students, the first day of every course that I teach is that everybody that is considering being a social worker comes in with a story. They come in with a very full life of a lot of knowledge and a lot of experiences that sort of directs you. Parker Palmer calls it a calling. What is your calling? And I really felt my calling was social work once I realized what it was, what social workers do. I grew up in rural Minnesota in a family business, a very unique family business. My parents owned and operated jukeboxes, pool tables, pinballs, shuffle alleys, all the video games, all the different things. So I think from the age of 2, I grew up in bars and restaurants. So I saw a lot of stuff. And I had a lot of questions. I saw a lot of diversity. I saw things that didn't make sense to me. I saw poverty. I saw domestic violence. I saw alcoholism. I saw all these things that really made me confused and wondered why people couldn't have opportunity to have more of a quality of life or quality of resources, quality, have hope kind of things. And so I think I was fortunate. I mean, there was really a positive side to that family business, is that I met a lot of different people. And so being able to do that, it really made me interested in kind of the other person. And so that's kind of where my calling started. And my first job in college, other than waitressing and doing those kind of jobs, was a single weekend relief house parent in a group home with 12 children that had emotional behavior issues. So that was a real wake-up call. I was like 19, 20 years old, all of a sudden having to be this house parent and really trying to understand the dynamics of what was going on with the children, but also then understanding the history and the families and those kinds of things. So it has just continued to energize me. And it's hard. Being a social worker is really hard. Being a social worker is not always fun. Being a social worker, sometimes you feel like it feels real dark, like you want to give up. Like it just seems like nothing's going to get better. Sometimes you actually lose clients to death. And I think everything that balances that out is that one client that you see, or post client that you see weeks, months, years later, and you see how well they're doing, and you see the difference that I was able to make in their life by helping connect them and supporting them and caring about them without any kind of judgments. And I think also, Dr. Peterson, I think about my students. Wow, I am just all for student success. If students have a goal that they have the same type of calling like I have, I want to be there for them. I want to be able to help them figure out how to get through obstacles and how to strengthen all the good stuff that they have to be able to reach their goals. And it's possible. So that's kind of what's driven me. I just keep on going. And I see a hand raised from Christina.
Real quick.
Yeah.
Real quick, I just want to say, so would you say, if we were just to put this in terminology, it was experience that led to curiosity, that then led to that journey to figure out how things can be changed from your story?
Yes. And I think from the curiosity to the how things can change was a lot of hills, a lot of pain. My father was an alcoholic. My mother had some mental health issues that were chronic. I was a firstborn. So, you start looking at all the criteria. So curiosity, really, to grow your curiosity, you have to be willing to be vulnerable. You have to be willing to say, okay, I'm going to do this. I don't know if I'm going to do it right. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to listen to my heart. I'm going to listen to my spirit. And that kind of had kept me going. But going from curiosity to action, there's a lot of hills in between.
And then you brought up another important point that I don't think is very much emphasized. Usually when we think about professionals losing their patients, we often think of the physician or the doctor operating on the operation floor. But when we look at it from a statistical basis, we see that social service providers have higher suicide rates because of issues dealing with losing clients, because we create those relationships with them and we try to integrate that change. And then we get that loss. In a doctor situation, in the physician situation, the first time they might even meet that patient is on the operating table or is in the emergency room. They don't build that relationship. And so I'm just wondering, just really quickly, and then we'll get to students' questions. What is the importance of developing a sense of self and person? Because everyone in this room is going to be faced with that situation sometime in their professional history. What would be your advice to maintain this idea that what I'm doing is worthwhile, even though I've lost this? Can you speak to that for just a quick second, and then we'll get to our student questions?
Sure. Boy, lots of things were going in my mind when you asked that question. First of all, one of the biggest social worker creeds is do no harm. And sometimes that's scary because we're often, not always, but we're often second guessing ourselves. And the clients that we're working with, they don't come in with one simple problem and then you help them find solutions and then they go away and everything is cool and they don't have any more problems. That's not how life works, as we all know. So every time you see the same client, there could be new crises. So all of a sudden the game changes. So I think, and we were talking earlier today in the advisement group about the NASW Code of Ethics, National Association of Social Workers, has a code of ethics and standards for behaviors for practitioners. And in the last year and a half, they actually added 2 enhanced standards. One has to do with self-care. And then the second one has to do with not cultural competence, but cultural humility. And self-care and cultural humility are obviously things that we have to look at ourselves. We have to do ourselves. We have to love ourselves to be able to love someone else. Otherwise, we, as you mentioned, you know, burnout is a really common term of vicarious traumatization, compassion fatigue. All those kinds of things occur when you're giving. And yes, sometimes there is loss. I think another thing, though, is when you talk about sort of this difficulty or this darkness, is that, you know, like I said, social work is not an easy profession. There's not only actual loss of clients at times. I'm fortunate that I've only had one adolescent client complete a suicide, but that was really difficult and I'll never forget it. But there's also, I would say, safety concerns, not only clients, but the safety for social workers now. I was talking to a class recently, and I was saying, you know, by the time you all get in your practice, there's going to be some time where you're going to need to be at least somewhat knowledgeable of critical incident stress debriefing, that there are going to be shooters in your environment, that's going to happen. So things like that. And I think the other piece is not only the loss of the clients, but really where the biggest burnout happens with social workers is too much to do, too little time. And one of the things I tell my students immediately when they get into their internships is never isolate. So the more that you think you can handle things on your own, the more that you sort of, you know, suck it up and look inward rather than talking about your experiences, being vulnerable to second guess yourself, using supervision regularly, not just when there's a crisis, but maintaining you got to maintain yourself. And using supervision is also a part of that self-care. So I don't know if that answered your question, but it's complicated.
Yeah. And I'm going to ask the other panelists the same question because I think they're important to talk about. But Christina, I noticed you had your hand up, but you lowered it. Did you get your question answered before we move on to the other hands?
Yeah, I did. And it's more of, and I also had another question actually, is she mentioned, you know, being older, because I kind of feel like I started school late and I do have children. And she mentioned that she became a foster mother. How did you find that balance between the personal life with family life and still pursuing your degree?
Well, I'll try to say this as quickly as possible. My doctoral dissertation, which is it's a huge research study that goes on for years before you get your doctorate. My doctoral study was asking the question, you know, how do non-traditional first-generation students describe the challenges and barriers that keep them from perhaps obtaining the degree, and what influenced you to persist? What helped you get that degree? Because I have worked over the years with many students that were non-traditional age, first generation. I think my oldest student was 68. And so what I found out wasn't, you know, I was focused in the research like, oh, if I understood what they're really the biggest challenges, maybe as a professor, I could really dig in there and practice my social justice skills and just, you know, make this great for students so they can get their degree. Well, it wasn't about challenges and barriers at all. And my students had incredible challenges and barriers, deaths, car accidents, losses of children, all kinds of things, yet they all got their bachelor's degree in social work. What I found out was there was two factors that helped students persist. that help students actually get that degree. And one of them was the fact that they all had at least one cheerleader. Didn't have to be somebody close. I mean, it didn't have to be a spouse. It didn't have to be whoever. It was one person, at least one person that was rooting for them at all times. One person that could say, you've got this, you rock. You can do this, you can do this. I'm so proud of you. Keep on going. You can do this. And the second factor was, guess what? All of my students that I interviewed said, I had a goal. I had a goal to complete my degree. And so, yeah, you know, there was many times, especially my doctoral, you know, there was three of us that were in our 50s. Everybody else was like 29, 30, 31 years old, really computer savvy, tight with the APA. And here's, you know, like old Marcia sitting there going to these classes. It took me 6.5 years to get my doctoral degree. And my goal was I was going to get it before I'm 60. And I got it a month and a half before I turned 60. I had a goal. I was not going to let it go, you know, and I went part-time for classes, part-time for 4 years, and then worked on my research. And I had to be vulnerable. I had to sit there with tears in my eyes at the computer when we would have classes and they'd say, okay, do this and this and this. And I was like, I don't get it. You have to say, I don't get it as a student. You know, if you're quiet, then you're not going to learn. You have to say, I don't get what you just said. I don't get this assignment. I am just overwhelmed. But to also answer your question, don't think you can do more than you actually can do. And I was a single parent also. If you are a mom or you are a dad raising children, those children have to come first. And education is little bites. It all comes out okay in the end, but you don't want to be so traumatized by trying to go to school and work and have children and tell me that you're taking 4 classes or 5 classes a semester. It's like, it ain't going to happen. Somebody's going to get hurt. And for sure, it's going to be you. So
all right,
hope that answered your question.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask Johnny, you had your hand up. Did you get your question answered? Mr. Lopez?
No, I just wanted to ask if there's a lot of opportunities for felons in the field.
Everything that you do in regards to having your program and things like that. What state are you in?
Right now I'm in Arizona.
Okay, so all I can tell you is that every state is different in regards to criminal backgrounds and being able to practice. And states are also different with licensure. So as an example, the state of Arizona does not have what's called title protection, which is very, very unfortunate. So people are calling themselves social workers without having social work degrees. That would be like saying, you know, I'm going to go to this specialist doctor, but this person has a medical assistant degree. There's just a lot of concerns about that. And so every state has different layers. So I can't really answer that. I know if the felony is against the harm of a person. So as an example, if there's murder, if there's assault with weapons, some of those kinds of things might stop you from being able to get licensed. The state of Arizona is extremely loose in regards to the standards and even licensure. So I can't say more than that. But if you knew people that had some of that background and you want to email me, I can perhaps, I've got connections in the state, so I could ask somebody else and then get some answers for you, because I'm sure there's a website that lists some of these things. I also teach a little bit for ASU. And so I'm going to find out, I can find out from the ASU program how they deal with some of that. So like I said, every state's different. In Minnesota, I know that you can't get licensed if it's a felony. It's harm against a person.
Great, thank you. I noticed, I apologize, the name's not here. iPhone, you had your hand up, you lowered it. Did you get your question answered?
I'm sorry, my name is Veronica Chavez.
Thank you.
Yes, partially. I just have kind of like a, I don't know, maybe I'm already working as a social worker. I work for the Pascoyaqui tribe. And I just wanted to know, because I do have my degree, but it's in business administration. So this is why I want to go back to school to get my social workers for I could do my job better. But you were mentioning about the state of Arizona just getting social workers with without getting degrees. But I believe that some places they hire you if you do have a background in that area, if you've worked, you know, worked in social work area, because I worked for adult social services. So after that, I just kind of went into going into child social services. But
yeah,
the portion I work with is the children that are already aged out of CPS. So I just want to, that's the reason why I want to take the social worker things to kind of work with them to get more, I guess, better educated on how I could help my clients. So I don't know, what do you think of me being a social worker and going to school for that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you know, wow, that is just really great what you're doing. And you're definitely working with a very vulnerable group that society doesn't think about. Because you know what, if that population does not get their basic needs met and doesn't have a quality of life, guess where they're going to end up?
Right.
Jail, prison. Okay, so we know that, you know, and our country always does things backward. Our welfare system, unfortunately, a lot of the time does the Band-Aid thing. It's like, well, you get involved with the system after you violate things. And of course, you know, working with your population, you want to try to support and enhance and encourage. So that's really cool that you're doing that. In child and family welfare and adult protection services and some of those areas, which are all either government, public government, or tribal agencies, tribal organizations, a lot of the degree standards vary, okay? Even county by county, tribe by tribe. And so, yeah, you know, persons get hired based on their background or based on some abilities and things like that. I always encourage my students that are already working in some type of human service setting, and I probably have about 30% of the students at TOCC that are already doing something in the quote unquote human service field. I really encourage them to pursue their education just because there's so much out there. It's so complicated, and you can only shoot from the hip for so long. And so you need to be, you know, you just need to be careful. Plus you get burned out. That's why I went and got my master's after 2 years of even working with my bachelor's. I was working for an organization that was like really screwy. And I'm like, man, you know, these kids are getting better, but the support system is not there. And I don't know how to change it. I don't know how to respond to the mental health piece. I just know how to help them with treatment content. That doesn't mean they're going to stay sober. And so I went back to school, and that was very helpful for me to continue learning those kinds of things. Do you have an AA degree or bachelor's degree?
I have an associate's.
Okay, so probably your best bet, and maybe I didn't catch your name. What is your name?
Veronica.
What's your
Veronica
last name?
Chavez.
Is it CH?
CHA V as in Victor, EZ.
Okay. I think your best bet would probably be to set up connect a time with Dr. Peterson, because I wouldn't have access to your records right now. And I'm saying this to all of you that maybe already have an AA degree, or if you have an AA degree already, obviously there's only some additional courses that you might want to take in social work, or in addition to social work, that would help you get ready to transfer to a bachelor's program. And maybe you're not even, you're working full time. If you're raising a family, a bachelor's program is just not on the books right now, but that you start taking the social work courses. I know I teach a practice course, 295, and I teach the other ones too, but I'm thinking you're in 291 right now. So being able to do that and just start becoming aware, start learning, and I try to give students all kinds of opportunities. And if you know that down the line, you really want to increase your skills and your knowledge and your education, then to really look with Dr. Peterson on what are the other courses that you might need outside of those 3 social work courses to help prepare you to apply for a transfer for a bachelor's program, which would mean, 2 more years, but just extremely worth it. And also, if you graduate with a bachelor's degree in social work, not sociology, not psychology, not counseling, but social work from an accredited institution, you can apply for advanced standing and only have to go 1 year to get your master's.
Oh, wow.
If you have any other degree, any other bachelor's degree than social work, you have to go 2 years. So you want to make wise decisions, about your time, your money, what you're doing.
Right.
Great.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. And let's do one more question. April has had her hand up for quite a while, and then we'll move on to our other presenters.
Good thing you don't have to hold them up.
Yeah, I was going to joke and say my hand's tired, but just to piggyback on that, I already work in case management. I left my senior year to come here to get my associates in social work, because my bachelor's is in family and child studies, but my college doesn't offer a social work bachelor's degree. They offer sociology and psychology, but I didn't want to take any of those classes. So that's why I'm here for that. But my question was, and I'm also certified by the state of Oklahoma as a behavioral health case management specialist. They do that for college students who have 60 hours or more. You just go through the state, you take the courses, and then take the test to get the certification. And that's how I got the job I got now, plus with my college credit on there.
So here's a woman with goals, by the way. Goals. Okay.
But my question was, you talked about social work in the beginning, and you made the comment about, they just came in and took kids out of the home and checked cupboards and all that stuff. My question was, I wanted your opinion on Highland versus Bracken, which was the Supreme Court is about to take up this case in November, which states that Texas, Louisiana, Indiana are declaring that ICWA is unconstitutional.
You want my opinion? You want me to swear or do you want me to be nice? No.
I just wanted your valid
Really,
opinion.
yeah, it's total garbage. And what you have is, without a big political debate today, you have a lot of red states that are continually trying to disempower any disenfranchise any kind of situations of persons of color. And of course, you know, the whole issue with ICWA and how long that that things have been going on and how much, I mean, the struggle is real right now for many states and many counties to even operate with that federal law. And so now you have some red states that are saying, oh, you know, we're gonna really tackle this. And I'm like, it's horrible. It's horrible, horrible, horrible. NICWA, National Indian Child Welfare Association, has got some very strong, impressive lobbyists. And I think, you know, the fight is real and the fight is there. So, yeah, I just think it's horrible. And what is also horrible is how many states and counties look the other way or just throw up their hands and don't take ICWA seriously. You know, they don't, the training isn't there, the support isn't there. And so it, you know, it's a constant struggle. It's uphill all the time. And there again, you got to have goals. You got to keep on looking forward, keep on pushing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Valdez. And so for the sake of time, I do want to move on to our other instructors who are here with us tonight. The next instructor I want to talk to, he's one of our adjunct instructor. His name is Dr. Michael Medrano. When I was dean, I had the fortune of hiring him to teach our abnormal psychology class and our treatment and addiction classes. And I haven't regretted it since. And I invited him here tonight to see another view in the clinical psychology area and to tell about his journey through his educational experience and what he's been through. And he is a doctoral graduate from University of Arizona for our Arizona folks. So I'd like to turn the time over to Dr. Michael Medrano.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson. That was a great introduction. I appreciate it. So like Dr. Peterson said, my name is Michael Medrano. Excuse me, I'm just getting over being sick. I apologize. I'm originally from Arizona. I'm from a small town in Phoenix called Tolleson. I doubt that any of you have ever been there or heard of it. And I went to U of A for 11 years, if you can believe that. So I did my undergraduate, my bachelor's degree in psychology, my master's degree in clinical psychology, and my PhD in clinical psychology. And I will be honest with all of you, by the time I completed my bachelor's, I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. Having a bachelor's degree in psychology does open up some opportunities. It depends on kind of what your end goals are. But I kind of was just so unsure of what I even wanted to do. And so I had no goals and direction. I just wanted to finish. That was my goal. So at the time, I just started to apply to different graduate programs, seeing what would happen. And I had no real backup plan after that. So for those of you who don't really have solidified goals or feel like you have it all figured out, don't worry, I'm still working on it right now. 11 years down the line. And so I ended up on the second round getting accepted to U of A into their clinical psychology program. So oftentimes folks want to know kind of what is a psychologist. And I think that's a loaded question, because a psychologist can be a bunch of different things. And that's kind of one of the benefits of this kind of career trajectory. For me, being a clinical psychologist and entering into a program like that, one thing to keep in mind is for many of the programs, depending on if you pursue a PhD, which is usually very emphasizing of research as well as clinical practice. And so my program emphasized what's called a science practitioner model. So I was simultaneously being trained as a research scientist as well as a therapist to be able to intervene with folks and provide treatment to people. So as one might imagine, that's pretty stressful, just inherently. Our program takes, if you're pursuing most PhDs, you're looking at least 5 to 7 years. The other option, if you wanted to pursue some kind of doctoral level degree in psychology, but you wanted to focus more on the clinical aspects of things, so focusing primarily on how do I treat people who present with mental health concerns, you could focus on a degree that's called a PSYD, P-S-Y-D, and that's a degree, Doctor of Psychology. And those programs tend to be shorter in duration. I've heard they can be anywhere from 3 to 4 years. And again, it's more heavily focused on kind of that intervention treatment piece of things. So a PhD combines all of that intervention treatment training that you would get in a PsyD and shoves that all in with a side of research, as well as learning how to teach at a college level. That's where I picked up some of my first courses. Abnormal psychology, it will always be my favorite course forever and always. Yeah, that's kind of what started me down my path of psychology, just having that interest in what happens when things go wrong. What does that look like for people? And how do we even think about what does it mean to be abnormal? And that's always a question that I give my students. For those of you who have taken my class before, my abnormal class, that's a discussion question I always ask people is, what do you think of that idea of abnormality? So I also had a family. And to answer a question, I think, Christina, you may have brought it up a little while ago. I don't know, honestly, how, other than my wife being a saint and really helping me so much, carrying a lot of that load. Me eventually, after some hard lessons, learning that I need to set boundaries for myself. Things like I will not work past 5 o'clock. I won't work on the weekends. Those were things I had to start implementing for myself, because in graduate school, especially in psychology, especially at the U of A, in their kind of culture and their program, you kind of can just work 24/7 if you really wanted to. So that's another thing to keep in mind for those kind of interested in this career path, is to kind of have an idea of what are my personal boundaries and how do I want to implement those for my own kind of sanity and for the sanity of my family. So I would say probably the main thing that made me want to pursue the PhD after I kind of examined this a little bit more closely was I got involved as an undergraduate in a psychology lab. And we were interested in questions around how do mental processes, so things like thoughts, emotions, things like that, how do those interact with our body? How do our body and psychology kind of line up together? How do they interact with one another in a field that's called psychophysiology? And so I did a lot of research, and my dissertation was based off of um, electroencephalography, or EEG. So if you ever see maybe on TV where people put on those caps when they're at the doctor's office, and they have all those little holes and electrodes in them, that's the type of research that I did. And I was actually very interested in looking at how people who chronically worry, so they experience a lot of worrisome thoughts, how do those people's brains, particularly the frontal part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, how do they differ from people who do not worry as much? It turns out that they do differ, according to my dissertation, and that they may differ in such a way that there's a particular part, a signal in the brain, that those who are high on worry actually are exhibiting a lot more, or using a lot more resources in the brain, using a lot more energy to actually have to contend with their worries, but also whatever it is the task is that they're trying to complete in their world, in their day, throughout their life. So I think a lot of that eventually was, I found that thing that made me very curious, and I wanted to answer those questions, but I also wanted to take those answers and help people with them. And so that's why I felt like this was a perfect fit for me, because I could do both of those things. So on any given day, I would spend half the day in my lab running these experiments, and the other half of the day I would be in clinic treating people who were experiencing anxiety disorders, depression, what have you. And so it felt like I was performing a science that was intellectually stimulating, but also relevant for people, if that makes sense. And I think that's, you see, took me 7 years to complete, because I took a whole semester off every time we had a child. So things happen, life happens, remember that. And now I work for One Medical, which is a new company that's new to Arizona, at least. And I am what's called a clinical health psychologist. And I'll kind of put a pin in that for a little bit, just because I don't want to take up too much time in case there's questions. But basically what I do is what's called brief intervention. And I focus primarily with older adults and helping them to live more holistically healthy lives using psychological intervention.
All right, thank you, Dr. Medrano. I do want to start with a question before I turn it over to the students. It's the same question I asked Dr. Valdez. Is, you mentioned that your journey has been kind of, you're in search of that meaning and stuff, but what, I kind of heard it in some of the statements you had, but could you like pinpoint what gives you the passion to do what you do?
Sure. And I think it really has always been that combination of intellectual curiosity helping other people. So, and maybe that's a little bit of a selfish answer. Sometimes I think about that too, to be honest with you, is I always wanted something that was mentally engaging and challenging, and felt like I was answering questions, that I was the one who was doing the question answering a question that no one had yet answered. That was always intellectually invigorating. But I had friends who were only researchers. They never saw a patient a day in their life. They only did research. And I could never do something like that. I think it would drive me crazy, because on the flip side of that is having to feel that intellectual curiosity, intellectual energy, going into things, I have to feel like it has a purpose and a meaning in helping other people. I think that's ultimately at the core of what I've always wanted to do, because even my research is eventually to help people who experience anxiety disorders, so we can better understand them and develop better treatments for them, but being able to help people now with the knowledge that we do have. And I think that's, this kind of interplay between those two things is what constantly fuels my motivation and passion, you could say.
So kind of like, you know, Dr. Valadez mentioned her life experiences and all those, but with both of you, it's this curiosity about wanting to make a change, and it's internally motivating, and seeing what you see, and but not just being there as a static researcher or the person who's on the sidelines or something, but just wanting to be engaged. Is that?
I would agree with that. I think that's a good summary.
Excellent, excellent. All right, I'm going to turn it over to the students. Is there any questions for Dr. Medrano at this moment? And we'll open up to the panel here in just a few minutes. But is there any questions directly for Dr. Medrano right at the moment?
And if no questions come to mind right now, you guys can always feel free to email me too. And I want to make myself available if you just wanted to talk about like what could career options look like in this area, and I'm always available for that.
I had a quick question.
I have a question too.
Oh, who was first? I don't know who was first.
I think Sandra came up first, and then the next question. So Sandra, go ahead.
Sure. My question is, how do you work with social workers in a medical setting? I've been a medical social worker, and I've worked with lots of different types of psychologists and, you know, interdisciplinary type of group. How do you see that fit?
That's a great question. At one of my other jobs, I used to work at Banner University Medical Center there in Tucson. And I was directly engaged with all of the medical social workers constantly. A lot of what the social workers did for us were screening patients to see who it would be helpful for them to have a meeting with us in terms of, is this person experiencing depression? Did they lose a loved one recently? On top of the other medical complications that they're dealing with. But also feeling like I needed to rely really heavily on my social workers to help me resource my patients. Because oftentimes their stressors were things like, I'm about to lose my house because I haven't been able to work due to my kidney disease, but I don't qualify for disability yet. And that I can provide someone with treatment for anxiety and stress about that all day long, but it's not going to change the circumstances. And so I think that's where psychologists and social workers can work really well together, especially in medical settings. And I feel like reciprocally, I could provide more information, more in-depth types of assessments and things like that, just given my training to the social workers so that they could better offer, what does this person need? What would be beneficial for them? What do we need to know about this person? Different things like that. I always enjoyed working with social workers.
Thank you for that question, Sandra. And I do think it's important to know that, you know, the best model of care these days is an interdisciplinary model, that no one should be working in silos, especially when we're dealing with humans, their life, their behaviors, and their situations. The best model is interdisciplinary, and that we all should work together. So I think that's an excellent example. So Sandra, thank you for that question. I think it's very important to understand how our systems work together and how we should promote that through our practices. Okay, thank you. There was another question, but I saw it up briefly. Was it Christina, or who did I miss on the questions?
Yeah, I had a question for him. Being that he stated he was still trying to figure out the different type of, I guess, field, so to say, was there one more particular that called to you than another?
I think for me, because of the flexibility, one of the benefits of getting a PhD is there's a lot of work to do. One of the benefits and drawbacks, maybe I could say, is there's a lot of work to do. So there's a lot of different things that you could focus on. So it gives you kind of that opportunity to look into different types of things. I collaborated frequently with other professors who didn't do exactly the same thing that I did, but each one of us could bring in work on a particular topic, and the other person specialized in this. And so you get exposed to so many different things by the time that you're done. And I think for me, ultimately, my decision was not settling on one thing, but realizing it's okay not to settle on one thing because there's so many things. Does that make sense? And
Wow, yeah.
thankfully, this program is designed that way. And there's a lot of the programs are designed that way to expose you to so many different things. And I feel like I got one of the best educations anybody can get in the world. And I feel very grateful for that. Because not a lot of people get it. And kind of, in all honesty, I think it happened by chance because I had no idea what I was doing with my life. And sometimes that's okay. And that's another reason why I try to tell my students too, that I'm very, I try to be very focused on offering a hand up the ladder, so to speak, like looking back to other people who are starting out their academic pursuits and careers. And I want to make sure that I can be a source of someone who got through all the crappy parts of it and be a resource for people to help you get through it in as much as I can. So one of my jobs, I actually worked at ASU social work, school of social work. That was my postdoctoral position. And I was supervising social workers and teaching them how to do psychological intervention with their clients. So I know folks over there, if that's an interest that some folks have in terms of pursuing their bachelor's in social work, if I could be of any assistance with those types of things. I know tons of people in the psychology department. If you want to ask me questions specifically about the U of A and what that can look like and things like that. That's my commercial for everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Medrano. And we'll open up for more questions at the end to the entire panel. But again, I do want to emphasize, I really think in this field, sometimes we find what we're looking for and sometimes it finds us. And sometimes that journey is a combination of both. And I think we've seen this with both of our presenters today so far. That and I will tell you, in my journey when I was doing social services and stuff, it found me. I was just looking for a job and it captured me. So, but I'll get into that a little bit later. But thank you, Dr. Medrano, and we'll talk some more here in just a little bit. I do want to get to Professor Jose Amparo. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I'm a little bit biased when it comes to Professor Amparo. He's probably one of my favorite human beings. Me and the last social service program that I really worked in was developing a intimate partner violence prevention program for a college. And it actually became ranked in the top 5 in our nation, and it's still one of the models for intimate partner intervention on college campuses. And he played a key role in that. He developed our student program. He did individual intervention with our students. And he was just a remarkable human being. And I've enjoyed both his friendship and his collegial degree. He is a licensed practical counselor. So we've heard from our social work area, we've heard from our clinical psychology area, and now we're going to hear from our counseling arena with here in the state of Arizona. So with that being said, Professor Amparo, I want to turn the time over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson, for that introduction. So my name is Jose Amparo. I'm originally from Yuma, Arizona, rural community right by the border. Just briefly, my educational background, I went to, I started at Arizona Western College back in 2002, just getting my general studies, moved on to NAU Yuma to get my bachelor's. I initially wanted to be a teacher, but kind of what Dr. Peterson just mentioned, right? Sometimes the field finds you. So at that moment, I was working for a mental health provider when I was doing my studies, and I really fell in love with the work that we were doing for the community. So when it was time for my student teaching, I kind of changed directions, right? So I ended up graduating, with my bachelor's in liberal studies, actually, and then got accepted into the graduate program for mental health counseling, also in Yuma. So all in all, it took me about 10 to 11 years to finish, my associates, my bachelor's, my master's, which if I would have gone straight, right out of high school, I think I would have finished everything within 7 to 8 years, maybe 9. But I had a family at that time when I started my master's degree. I had a son, and during that time, my daughter was born. So, I had to take some time off here and there just to attend to my family as well. In my work experience, like I mentioned, I started working for a mental health provider in 2007. So it kind of took me in a lot of different directions. During my master's degree, I fell in love with the domestic violence work, and helping the victims, helping the perpetrators. So it was something that was drawing my interest. But then, graduating from there, it kind of took me a different direction. I started working with trauma, with pre-birth, with mothers, babies. So I did a lot of 0 to 8 work for a couple of years. And I really started falling in love with the work of, how we play an impact in not only the person we have in front of us, but also how we impact the people that surround them. So, I kind of shifted. So nothing to do with domestic violence. I kind of shifted all, to trauma work, again, working with families. And, I think Dr. Valadez mentioned also sometimes we get callings, right? And I'm a firm believer of that, we get callings throughout our journey in life. So, after learning how, the baby, in the womb works, how trauma impacts them, the intergenerational trauma, I actually had the calling with the opportunity to go work at the prison, the state prison setting. So I kind of went from pre-birth to, state prison, and kind of saw where if trauma goes untreated, where it can lead up to, right? Not for everybody, but for some people. And then I kind of went back to mental health again. But the second time that I went back to the community mental health, it was more working with teenagers. At that specific time, we did a lot of work with foster kids, adoptive kids, a lot of, again, just trauma work and really understanding the individual, their background, understanding who we have in front of us. But then also, along those lines, like Curtis mentioned, I was kind of all over the place. I had the opportunity to work with, Dr. Peterson, Arizona Western College, with, in interpersonal violence. So, my passion at one point kind of took me back and kind of took me away from it as well. So I've kind of been, seeing different things, different diagnoses, a lot, different population. Currently, I live in Tempe, Arizona. And since 6 years ago, I've been working with refugees from all over the world. It's mainly just children. I work with children refugees that come from, again, different parts of the world. These are kids who come unaccompanied. So that means they come without parents. So I've been working with these children for the past 6 years, and really has been an eye-opener as to, not only is there just what we see here in the States or from my end from the border, but what happens all over the world, right? There's just a lot of need, a lot of trauma, lots of crises. I mean, we get kids where I work at right now, you know, anywhere from age 1 to 17 years of age. So, you know, that has really opened up my eyes also to that more of that human part of me. If anything that I've learned and I really cherished throughout my career, it's been, you know, finding myself. And I think I find myself on a daily basis. When I hear the stories, when I hear how, you know, I guess I'm in my backyard right now, but some of these kids, their backyard, it's war, it's bombs, it's shootings, it's, you know, it's the maras, it's just terrifying to hear that. So, you know, I can say that's one of the things I really have enjoyed. It's finding myself. And I say enjoy because that makes me a better person. But not only that, it also helps me help that person better as well. So that's kind of been everything in a nutshell. You know, the work that I've done, like Dr. Peterson mentioned, I am a licensed professional counselor since 2016. And actually right now I'm also a clinical supervisor for the Board of Arizona Behavioral Health. So I also supervise, you know, those associate license level clinicians who are moving into their independently licensed career. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I don't know if there's anything else or any questions that you may have.
Jose, I'd like to, again, I think you hit on it a couple times with your presentation, but I want to kind of put it in kind of a couple sentence summary like I did with the other panelists. What gives you your passion in what you do?
Wow. That's a deep question, Dr. Peterson. You know, first off, so there's two things. When I started in this career back in Yuma, you know, it's actually the #1 unemployment. They have the #1 unemployment rate from the months of April to November. Why? Because Yuma, it's an agricultural county. So with that said, there's poverty. I myself, you know, when we moved to the States, I lived in poverty. I know what that looks like. You know, at one point we lived in a trailer when, you know, the 8 of us did not fit in the trailer. So some of us would spend time outside until it was time to go to sleep. That's when we all came into the trailer. So, you know, growing up in those means, once I got into the master's degree, it really hit home that my calling was in the community work, helping, you know, those individuals, you know, maybe with my story or more severe of my story, right? So that kind of drew me to the mental health side. Currently, again, the calling and how things call you back. You know, my parents, they migrated to the United States. I come from an immigrant family, so now working with this population, it also hits home, right? It hits home because I didn't go through what they've been through, but I know what the immigrant challenges, you know, what they face and what they're gonna face in the future. So I think those two things drew me to, you know, to this field. And if I can add one more, what kept me in the field, again, it's just listening to everyone's story, right? I think we all have a story, and bringing some understanding and compassion, you know, to those individuals in need really has kept me going.
Thank you for that, and thank you. And so I do want to open it up. Does anybody have any questions for Professor Amparo at this point? Any curiosities for the professor? Okay, and we'll open up.
This is Angela. I actually have a question for all three of you. I was wondering how your spouses at the time you were going to school, and also during your, I know Dr. Valadez said it's being a social worker is hard, and there's, I'm sure, hardships through all three of your guys' careers. But how did your spouses handle you having a bad day?
Guess I can answer that first, if that's okay. That's a very, very good question, Angela, and it's a tough one. It's a tough one for me to answer because all I can say is I'm very thankful for the wife that I have because she's been through so much, you know, in my grad school and even in my daily work. One of the things that I have put in place with my boundaries, with my family, it's I don't talk about work at all with my family at all. I try not, well, I try to leave it at work, but even when I'm at home, I don't talk about it. I don't even open that door, and it has worked for me because I don't want to transmit that stress per se to them. I have myself, I have been, you know, been able to implement, you know, different things after work, during work, just to kind of keep myself afloat, because it is very tough. Like Dr. Valadez mentioned, it's a tough, you know, having to hear everyone's story, the emotions, you know, it takes a toll on you. So that's what I can share. Just me and myself, I have those boundaries and I try to take care of myself so I don't transmit that to, you know, to my family.
Sorry if you hear my son yelling at me in the background. So the question was, just to remind myself, how did our spouses kind of deal with if we were having a bad day? Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, and like through your educational part, getting to your career, and then once you're in your career, how do they handle you having a bad day?
And so for us, we were married very young. I spent my entire graduate school career, I was the only one who was married, which kind of brought its own level of isolation. I was the only one with kids. That was another level of isolation. So there were other stressors on top of kind of the job itself. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't do a good job moderating that stress for myself, moderating what I brought home, at least in the beginning, because you really don't know how, to be honest with you, until it's kind of upon you. And so I think at various points, just learning, like, for one, you do become desensitized to many things. So the stress, I would say, does improve compared to like your first year of doing therapy, for example. So the stress will naturally kind of improve on its own. But I think also kind of having a conversation with your spouse about what they feel like is a good solution, or what they feel like is the problem to begin with in relation to kind of your work stress. And I think holding to those boundaries for them. Like, I would not come directly home after a day where I saw 10 clients of heavy trauma cases. I would not go straight home. I would go to the grocery store. I would go on a walk. I would go to the gym. And my wife just kind of knew that was because that day was not going well, or not to say it's not going well, but it was a heavy day. So different things like that. Hopefully that kind of answered the question.
Yeah, that did. So far from both of you two, I got boundaries, which sounds good. Thank you.
I was actually taking some notes while everybody was talking here. So persons that get into the fields we're talking about right now usually think, I'm just going to say usually, because we can't do like absolute stereotypes, but I'm going to say usually think that we can take on more than we should. Okay. Persons that are in our positions, as you've heard today, also have to be reminded and have to work on boundaries. I never knew what that word was when I was going to school for my undergrad and graduate. Nobody talked about boundaries. What is a boundary? That was a new word that came, you know, like maybe in the 90s or 2000. So lots of times when you're full of compassion and you just want to, you get good feelings from caring and giving to others, and that fuels us. Pretty soon, we're not aware of the importance of boundaries in our lives. So as Michael and Jose have talked, you know, one of the very first things they said is, you know, I worked on boundaries, setting things, setting limits, setting walls, and being intentional about what I bring home and what I don't bring home. Part of your question was about when you're a student, though, how do you do it? So I was kind of listening to that. I was a first generation college student. I mean, I even my cousins, and I come from large family systems, nobody went to college but one cousin. And I was, you know, the first generation. And my parents, they went to school. I think they got like a 7th grade education. They were children of first generation immigrants. And so the idea of higher education was not something that was really supported by my parents. I had to say, I want to go to school. I want, you know, and I think now, you know, my husband was my cheerleader when I was working on my doctoral education. He knows about self-care because I talk about self-care, and so he mirrors that with me. Self-care also, believe it or not, may involve your own therapy. So seeking your own therapy, dealing with your own traumas, dealing with childhood history, dealing with things that might trigger you from time to time. And if you think you're invincible, and all of a sudden you're losing your boundaries, you're burning out, you know, everything gets really messy. So I was really fortunate to have a husband that is very supportive of the work that I do, reminds me about self-care. And self-care is, you know, just not chocolates in a bubble bath. It's setting limits. It's it's being able to say, I can't do anymore. I can't do enough right now. I can't do anymore. And when I talk with my social work students that are in human service settings right now, especially with tribal social services, they just have so much on their plate. And it's very difficult for my students to say, you know, I can't take anymore. I can't do more than what I'm doing. And so we have these conversations even in my courses about what's going on during the week. So being vulnerable, setting boundaries, looking at that self-care stuff, this is all really, really intentional things you have to do, and seeking support. And you might not have a spouse. I am sure there are some single parent people in this room. You don't have that. I didn't have that when I was younger. So it's like, okay, what do I need? You know, being able to work on saying, I need this, I need time, I need help, I need someone to please, you know, take the kids this evening. I need whatever time. And if you don't say I need it, then you're not going to get your needs met, because the people can't read your mind. So it's really having to ask for help. And that's hard for us to do. And yet we're expecting our clients to ask for help.
Thank you for sharing, guys.
All right, I want to thank our panelists. I'll finish with kind of the social science end of things because that's what I was supposed to present on, but I think our three presenters in our clinical and our helping fields are much better. But my doctorate degree is actually in research and is in scholar work. I did the social services for decades. I ended up with the program that me and Professor Amparo did together. But, you know, it's interesting to hear the stories and the similarities of educational journeys, you know, and where we end up within the helping fields. You know, when listening to these three, I was reflecting on my own history. You know, I was raised in a family of poverty. My mom called me the almond baby because they couldn't afford dinner. So they'd go for walks and they would pick almonds off of trees and that would be their dinner. You know, I'm first generation high school, I'm first generational college, and I'm the only one in my family who has ever gotten a doctorate degree, much like a lot of people. And you know, when I went to college, my family disowned me because they thought education was ridiculous. And just finding that passion. I remember when I went, and that's why I brought this question up to all of our panelists about finding your passion. I went into college going into fine arts. I found out very quickly that my grandma lied to me. I can't draw worth anything. But you know, I did that and I started doing general ed. I took this Psych 101 class, and then I was going to go into an industrial arts program with printing and graphic arts. And that next semester, at the end of the semester, I realized I didn't pick up a single graphic arts book. But I read most of the classics within psychology, from Thorndike to B.F. Skinner and all of those folks. I read all of those things and I'm like, okay, this is where I belong. And that's what I mean. Sometimes it finds you and where you are. You know, when I think about my first social services job, I was coming out of my bachelor's degree and I'm like, okay, I need a job. I'm doing the psychology stuff. So I started applying and there was this ad for a shelter assistant. And I went to this organization and it was supposed to be a 30-minute interview. And the lady asked me, you know, what do you know about domestic violence and sexual assault? And you know, the only answer I had at the time, well, I took a class on it. But the only thing I remember is my dad said, don't you ever do that. And that interview that was supposed to last 20 minutes ended up being an hour and 45 minutes, and I was educated. And for some reason, that director saw something in me and hired me. And, you know, at least within the Western states and especially the Northwest, I'm actually one of the very first male shelter managers for a women's victim and children's victim shelters. So, and then I spent many years within the field of domestic violence, within advocacy. I went on to supervise social workers and counselors in the women's prison system, working with women in trauma. And then I worked as a director for working with children who were sexually abused and survivors of sexual abuse. And then I had the honor to, again, work with my friend, Professor Amparo, when I went to Yuma in a violence prevention program. And that's what I mean is sometimes your passions and what guides you finds you. I never expected in any of my educational journey that I would ever end up right here in this space, talking with incredible people, incredible human beings, not just my colleagues, but my students that inspire me every single week. And, you know, and again, when I go back to my college experience, I was even tricked into going to college. I was told we were going to go on a drive, and somehow we ended up on a university campus where a scheduled interview with a advisor was taking place that I didn't know about. So I was even tricked into going to college originally. So those are the things to keep in mind is sometimes your passions find you, but let your life guide you, let your education guide you, let your experiences guide you and take you where you belong, because that's where you belong. And those are all very important things. And I appreciate my colleagues for coming. I do want to open up the room for at least the next little while. for everybody. I did mention I'm here for the social science part, just so you know, outside the clinical and the helping fields, we are in desperate need for strong social sciences within Native country. Many of the major social science organizations have put out cries and saying, hey, I'm going to be honest with you. One of the things the American Psychological Association has admitted to is we're too white. We're not inclusive enough. We don't have the full story of the complete human experience because large populations are excluded from this discovery about what human behavior and human systems are all about. And so, and in a Native country, there's so little research that is done by Native scholars and Native researchers to understand the needs and the way we should be treating people and helping people on Native lands. So we end up using colonized models of helping, for example. And so I would say if your interest is in scholarship and research and what you're desperately needed, not only for your own people, but for the science itself, because we've excluded other ideas of understanding knowledge way too long. And when we go and we do research within communities that have been excluded from the sciences, we find that there's so much missing. There's so much knowledge to be gained and understood. And there's so many gaps that we need to have filled. So if you do have that scholarly interest, I would encourage you to find that and help guide not only our knowledge of people, but also the next generations of people who are going to be helping our Native communities, because there's just not enough research done by the people who are in those areas. So that's my soapbox. I'll get off of it. And I'm going to open up for any questions for our three individuals here. We have a diverse panel, counselors, clinical psychologists, our social work. So I really want to encourage everybody, please ask any question that you have. And so I'm just going to open the floor to all the students. If you'll just put your hand up, and then I'll just call on you so we don't, so I don't miss anybody. Just raise your hand. And we'll just start calling on individuals. If there is no questions after about 10, 20 seconds, I'm going to leave it to the panel to do some closing remarks and some reflections, and then we'll call it a night. But I do want to give the opportunity for students here to ask any questions you like. So I'm opening it up.
I had a question. Being in this field and taking on several clients, was there anything that you had taken on that kind of went towards, I guess because everyone knows there's that whole Jeffrey Dahmer going on, but has it ever gotten towards, I guess, that type of aspect where you kind of question spiritual and scientific? If that made sense, I don't know.
Can I rephrase the question and you tell me if this is what you're trying to get at?
Yeah.
Has there been an experience where we felt like our training in kind of the sciences and a mainstream education fell short and we were kind of faced with more spiritual or other types of questions like that within our country?
Yes, just like that. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. I just want to make sure I'm answering the question appropriately for you. I would say that happened earlier on in my career. It does happen now because I deal with a lot of end of life things because I work with older adults. You're faced with kind of questions, and maybe this is just my experience. I'm excited to kind of hear what the other panelists have to say on this topic. You're faced with kind of questions of limitations of what it means to be human, and also kind of philosophical questions of good and evil, and how does mental illness play into that. And I don't think there's ever a concrete answer, I guess, would be my takeaway. I don't know if that was a helpful answer, but in short, yes, that does come up. And for me, it came up more often when I was seeing more folks with more severe types of pathology, as well as kind of facing other circumstances in their lives, like the socioeconomic status, different things like that, that kind of exacerbate things like mental illness and making hard moral decisions, I guess. I don't know if that was helpful. Hopefully it was.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll add to it a little bit. From a social work perspective, I mentioned the NASW Code of Ethics earlier. The way it's phrased in the social work profession is working beyond your scope of practice, which actually is one of the top license and professional violations that all of the licensing boards across the United States find. Working beyond your scope of practice, and guess what the first one is? Boundaries. So it's all around boundaries and relationships with clients and things you do and say. So you can be just as dangerous with, there can be a dangerous situation with your client if you've got boundary issues, or working beyond your scope of practice. And tonight, this has been a really interesting example of how I said earlier, you do not work in isolation. If you're not sure what to do, you consult as much as possible. Now, there are some things that we have to do, and I think we'll, all three of us could say, yes, I wish I didn't have to do that, or I didn't have to provide that service. I wish something else was more different. There's a particular policy. We talk about, there's a concept called moral injury, where morally we feel like as practitioners, we have to act a particular way based on the law, based on policies. You think about the work that Jose does and working with undocumented minors and different things, and things that you wished you could do something differently, but you can't based on policy and based on law. When in doubt, you consult, you refer. If I'm working with a family from a social work perspective and I've got a client and that client is demonstrating, a lot of behavioral issues and I'm having difficulty sorting them out, I might refer that client to Michael. And I might say, Michael, you're good at testing. I don't do much testing. Evaluate this client. This is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm seeing. I think this client might benefit from medication. Social work, clinical social workers do not write scripts for medication. I might want a second opinion based on things I'm seeing. And Michael could go, well, yeah, I've seen clients like this, and this is the approach, this is the treatment, this is the intervention that seems to work the best. Here are your options. And then he throws the client back to me, and then I have to sit and figure out as a social worker, how am I going to get my client services and to be eligible to get covered for those services? So that's how we kind of work hand in hand. That makes sense?
Yeah. All I want to add is when I heard the question, the first thing that came to mind was ethical dilemmas, because we run into those often, right? So I think with Dr. Valadez, it's important also, it's, if there's something that you have doubts or you're questioning, always reach out, you know, to your supervisor, your colleague, or refer out. I think that's one of the also one of the best ways to also set boundaries for, at least for myself. It's knowing my limitations and what's my expertise and what's not, because it can go down south in a heartbeat. I can say though, you know, at one point, you know, you did mention, you know, the phase of scientific. It's just being aware of your own beliefs and where you stand with that. Kind of goes back to cultural humility, like it was mentioned in the beginning. It's being aware of who, you know, what is it that is triggering you? What is it that you can do and you can't do? I was going to say, at one point I worked at a Christian center, and, you know, it's interesting because that's one of the things that was drilled to us, right? Is be aware of who you are, you know, where you stand, what you believe in, because you're going to get clients who don't believe the same way you do, who don't see things the same way you see. And that can also, you know, create some challenges. So I would just leave it at that. Just, you know, who you are, any ethical dilemmas, also, you know, just talk to somebody about it.
Thank you. I'll put in my little 2 cents. The question, you know, you mentioned Dahmer, and you know, there was so many opportunities to stop what he was doing with police and with all of the different school and all those things, but it was felt to see. And I think about a situation that I went through professionally. I did domestic violence offender groups for a few years, and I did treatment for a certain person who has the same last name I did. But after he went through a treatment program in the state I was in, and I was one of the facilitators, a couple of years later, he drowned his wife in the San Francisco Bay. And I think about that a lot when the question about Dahmer and about, you know, is there something I could have done differently when he was in my care, when he was in my group? Was there something I could have done that could have changed that situation? And I think coming to the realization that we're not the answer for everything that our clients go through. I always mention this in any of my helping classes. We are only seeds, okay? We are only there to provide the opportunity for change, whether it's providing a class, whether it's providing resources, whether it's providing counseling, whether it's any of those things. But in the end, the decision to change, the decision to make something happen in someone's life is really up to them. And I spent years being tormented by that and a few other incidences that occurred. And it's really coming to the realization that sometimes you have to rely, it was mentioned, you know, spiritual and faith. Sometimes you have to rely on your own spirituality and your own faith to know what you're doing does make a difference. But in the end, the decision to change is not up to you. And so when that question was asked, I reflected on that situation and was reminded that, you know, one of the things to keep sane in this field is, 1, keep close to your spirituality. 2, keep close to your family. As Dr. Valdez said, keep close to your ethics. And as she mentioned, don't try to do something outside of your area of expertise, because that's when we're not doing our job, because we're not providing that seed for that person to be able to change. When we practice something that we are not there for, that's when we can be more of the destroyer of lives than the helpers of life. And so that's something I reflected on that question. I hope that answered the question for the person. Is there another question from the class or the people who are?
I was going to add one more thing, Dr. Peterson. We do not have to love all of our clients. That's not in our job description. We don't even have to like all of our clients. And somehow there's this prescription that we think we have to be a certain way And one of the things that I am really loving learning about now, and I encourage all of you, you have to have a learning spirit. Learning never ends. And brain and neuroscience and trauma and behavior, how much that is starting to really come to the forefront this last decade, 2 decades. And I'm just really enjoying learning some of that, because you could be working with clients that are just really icky. I mean, you read their charts, you see what's going on, their behavior is a certain way, and it's like, you know, you're feeling guilty because it's just not easy to work with them. But understanding the science of trauma really can help you understand why a person is the way they are, why they think, why they react, and being able to put a spin on some of that science. And even more and more research around historical trauma and epigenetics. And I mean, how incredible our brain and our body is, and how much that involves our reactions and our behaviors. You can look at your clients in a different lens. And when you talk about spirituality and, you know, kind of this compassion we're supposed to have, and yet this professional demeanor and ethics, that has really helped me work with clients, because sometimes people do really icky things.
Thank you for that. Klein, I know you had your hand up and you're off mute, so please, I know you had a question. Please go ahead and go for it.
More of a comment question. Credit-wise, I'm classified as a freshman. I'll be turning 56 in a couple of weeks, but I just want to say thank you to the panel. I'm not 7 years and helping my tribal members. I work with the Tribal Substance Abuse Center, and this was a kind, as you guys put it, a field that I kind of walked into. It was more of you either work at the casino or find a different job, and this was an opening. And from that day forward, that sense of helping work to my capability, what I can do and not beyond, is something that I've been practicing. But tonight, hearing your stories and what you share and your experience professionally and your personal life has really, you could say, lit the fire again. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you for that feedback, Klein. That's really good, and I appreciate it, and I'm sure my colleagues do as well. Is there any other questions? We're hitting on about 7:25, so we have about 5 or so more minutes. Is there any questions that anybody is burning to ask while we have the panelists here before I ask them for closing remarks?
This is Angela. I actually have a question.
Yes, Angela.
In the future, are we gonna have something else like this again with the panelists in regards to in the field of psychology or in their individual careers? I mean, this is great. I mean, what everybody's brought to the table has been amazing. So I was just curious if something else was coming up that you might know of.
I don't know of anything in our area, but I can talk to my colleagues here. And I know that there was some instructors from the San Carlos Apache College that wanted to be here tonight that were not unable to. So it would be nice, you know, to set something like this up to also include those faculty over there. So I can talk to my colleagues and maybe arrange something more if they're up to that. This is recorded, and so it will be available to everybody. But yeah, based on what you're saying, we definitely could arrange something else maybe a little bit later in the semester or early spring.
All right, thank you, Dr. Peterson.
Okay, so let's go through. I'd like our panelists to do some closing remarks, and the question that I would like to them to answer is, in their toughest day, whether it was in college or in practice, the day that, you know, one of those days where they just wanted to give up and just throw in the towel, what was it that kept them going? And we can start with Dr. Valdez.
You have to start with me first. Usually when I'm having a really bottom out day in regards to practice with clients, or even now, you know, I'm not working with clients currently, but I'm working with students on a regular basis. I think my bottom out day is when I see possibility, but the resources, the avenues, the incompetence of a system, the marginalization or discrimination of something that my client is experiencing gets me sad and angry, and I wished I could change it. Those are the hardest days. I know that if I'm working with clients, I know I'm going to hear pain. I know I'm going to hear suffering. And I've been able to, because I've been in practice a long time, to be able to embrace that. But when I hear it, it's like, you know, this is so horrible. This is so horrible what is being done to my client or to my client system. And I guess what keeps me going the next day is I don't like to give up. So really thinking about your blessings and thinking about the successes that you've had. You know, like working with a mother who has several children and is living on Social Security disability with her husband, and that's rural. And she has an 8-year-old with spina bifida that is incontinent. And she has been trying to buy diapers and can't afford diapers. And I get to find out that with the doctor's prescription, she can go to Target and buy diapers for free. It's like, I just totally did something. I mobilized something for my client, and it changed her life. So I hold on to those kind of things, those sweet moments with your client when they say thank you, when you see a difference, and you know that, you know, I'm just, you know, I'm a dog with a bone. I just don't let it go. You know, Dr. Peterson knows that. It's like this has to happen. So, and if I feel like I can't do it, like I have no energy to next day say this has to happen, that's my red flag. That's my red flag to tell me, whoa, I need to step back. I need to pull away from everything, and I need to focus on myself for a while. And prayer is also a really important thing in my life, because it reminds me that I'm not invincible.
Thank you, Dr. Valdez. How about Professor Amparo? Let's hear from him.
Yeah, so for me, what keeps me going, it's first off, it's prayer. You know, when I'm having that tough time, or I just want to throw in the towel, you know, I take a break. I take breaks throughout the day, but prayer is my main one, and really, you know, asking for that strength to keep me going, and just to put me in places where I'm most needed. So I would say that's what drives me. Everything else comes with it, because again, that's my purpose, I feel at this time, right? Which is I'm there for a reason, and I gotta accomplish the goals that I'm set to accomplish. So yeah.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Mandrano.
This is fascinating that we all have the same answer ostensibly. Yeah, I would say I'll give the example of trying to get a psychology license, which is horrific and varies state by state. And for several reasons that were outside of my control, it was very difficult for me to get a license. And it was very close for the possibility of me not getting a license, which meant like the last 7 years, 11 years of my life would have been, even thinking about it now is very difficult. And so like that day, I was already looking at like other career options. What are my other skills? I'm leaving the entire field of psychology. I'm tired of all this stuff all the barriers that I've had to go through just to even get to this point. And I was so done. So I will say, God and my wife first and foremost together. Without those two things, that I would have already just given up. I would also say, very importantly, that as I was explaining the situation to one of my former professors, she basically almost begged me over email, and no, you can't do this. Like, I know it's so hard right now, but the field needs you. The field needs people like you. And like for me in that moment, I agreed with her definitely that people like me do not get PhDs in clinical psychology, let alone from places like U of A or things like that. I think I might be the first male Hispanic to graduate from the U of A clinical program. I have to double check that though. I'm definitely the first one in the last 15 years. And so having those people in your life, having a faith system to rely on, and those people to say those things to you, so that the things that you know that you are already aware of, but may not be able to recall in that moment because of everything that's happening around you. I would say that's what helps me, has helped me.
Thank you, Dr. Madrano. I just a little bit of summary, I think, of what we've heard is having a sense of purpose, either through faith or spirituality or meaning, being connected with some type of mentor, someone, a colleague, someone that understands the difficulties you go through, understanding your own limitations. But I would add also remembering those things that give yourself purpose. When I'm having a hard day, I think about my sons and my daughters. I think about my relationship with my wife, and I look at those and I go, am I successful in those as well? Am I successful with those as I am with my work? Because, you know, they're the closest connection to me. And so knowing that those connections are important, the family connections with children and with partners, the spiritual connection, having something more meaningful than just the existence we're in, and also having those professional connections, that person you can reach out to that understands what you're going through, and you can have that connection is I think, the summary that I give, and unless any of my panelists need to correct me or something, but I think with those words, if you don't mind, it's getting kind of late, and I know we've all had a long Monday and a start to our week. So I'm going to thank the panelists for coming tonight and sharing with us. And I do hope that we can do this again sometime. I am going to ask the students in my the Social Work 291. I look forward to your weekly reflections on what you learned from this experience. And for those who have just joined us and are part of it, thank you for coming tonight. And I hope that it was meaningful to you. I know I got a lot out of it as well. So I'm just going to say good evening to everybody. Thank you for coming, and have a good week and a successful week.
Thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Peterson.